my background, I have a conventional kind of education here in the States. I've got a BA and then I got a JD. I'm a member of the State Bar of California. Passed the bar in 1998. And I really got into Aleister Crowley through my research into 9/11, the events of 9/11 that happened here in the States. And I kept seeing this numerology and these numbers that were way beyond any kind of statistical, randomness. And so did these numbers have meaning? And led me down the road to Crowley. And then I kind of just applied my academic maybe training to a study of Crowley, independently of what other people said about him, or maybe some people are sympathetic about him. So I really read as many biographies as were available on Crowley. His own biography, his autobiography, which he called Confessions, which is way too long, but it actually has a lot of great information. And then also his core documents. So what did he write about? He was really, I call him a literateur, because he wrote on so many different subjects. He was a book writer, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, articles. He wrote for Vanity Fair here in the United States, as well as other publications. So I read all through that. And so I would say I'm pretty close to an expert in Crowley. I'm certainly probably, I don't know if there's anybody else me who's a Crowley critic as much as I am. Like, I'm not on the side. I'm not a practicer of magic. I've never been initiated. I'm not in an occult order. I'm not a Mason. So I would say I'm very much of a Crowley critic, I think is fair to say.
So a lot of people have heard the name Aleister Crowley or Crowley. Is it Crowley or Crowley? I want to make sure I pronounce it correctly.
Well, when I first started researching Crowley, my first book was published in 2010, by the way, Prophet of Evil, but I used to say Crowley, and then there's a poem called The Winged Beetle that he wrote, where he rhymes Crowley with holy. So I think it's really Crowley.
Okay, so I'm going to say
the way he would pronounce it.
All right, so I'll say Crowley from now on, Aleister Crowley. So as I was saying, a lot of people know the name, they've heard it, but they don't know who he was. So let's just create some context. Who was he?
An interesting guy. A lot of references, the public references in Ozzy Osbourne's song, Mr. Crowley. So like these are the names bandied around. It's usually talked in the context of being a dabbler. But what he was a person who was born in 1875, really at the peak of the British Empire. And he was in the largest class. He was an aristocrat. Came from a very wealthy family. And he ended up dying in 1947 in a kind of old folks home in Hastings, very south of the UK or England. But he had all the privileges of an only son who was from a wealthy family. He was brought up in what was called the Plymouth Brethren, which was a church by Darby, who was kind of a dispensationalist. But he was in a subset of that group, and it was called the Exclusive Brethren. So they were supposedly more ardent Christians. So he was brought up in that environment. His parents ran kind of, they supplied beer and kind of goods to the pub system in Britain. And when his mom died, he inherited a sum today, which would be like 20 million pounds, like incredible sum of money, which he wasted eventually. But he was brought up in this very rigid kind of church where they always read the Bible, and he went to religious schools. And at a certain point, he rebelled. He was able to pass the test to get into Cambridge. And when he went to Cambridge, he basically rebelled. And he said he wanted to become the devil's chief of staff. And he wanted to become one of these lights of the future. So I think like when he was in Cambridge, one of his three main interests were poetry, mountain climbing, and the occult. And he was white. I said he was white hot on those subjects, so he'd be reading late into the night on these different subjects. And also traveling around. He was very well traveled. And for his rock climbing expeditions, he would go to Switzerland, south of England, to this place with different climbing stuff. This is how he kind of got his health back into shape after almost dying in some of these private schools. They're very brutal, almost like another brick in the wall, like Pink Floyd brutality. With bullying and brutality. And he also traveled to kind of present-day Pakistan and India to climb two mountaineering expeditions, which are very, very well historically referenced. Like you can find out about them. One was called Kanchenjunga, and the other one's Chogo-Ri. So these are huge mountains that never were ascended. He didn't ascend them either, but one ended disastrously and ended really Crowley's rock climbing reputation and career after that disaster happened. But he really became, because he never really had to work, he really was able to dedicate himself to the occult, and I think he really wanted to become a glory of the future ages. So he really spent his time writing documents. He had his own encyclopedia about the occult. He called the Equinox. He was writing books on magic, so he was absorbing stuff. He went through the Masonic system. He went through this other group called the Golden Dawn, which was a ceremonial magical order, along with William Butler Yeats, a famous poet, Irish poet, who also knew Crowley. Actually, Crowley was very well connected with a lot of cultural figures at that time, the late 19th century or the 20th, early 20th century, like Somerset Maugham, Ernest Hemingway, Aldous Huxley, believe it or not. Rodin, who's a famous French sculptor who did The Thinker, if you remember that. Crowley wrote a book about Rodin called Rodin in Rhyme in France. But anyway, Crowley was really a multifaceted figure, but he was not a dabbler. He really looked into all kinds of traditions. One of the things that was happening in the late 19th century was the movement of Eastern esotericism into the West. And so he was part of that tradition, moving yoga and the I Ching and some of these other kind of Eastern traditions west. And he integrated it into his religion that he called Thelema, which is Greek for will. So I think that was kind of the primacy of his human will was really it. And one of his primary events happened in Egypt, in Africa, in 1904, where he was with his wife, Kelly, at the time, who said, "They're looking for you." And he was responding, so he did some magical stuff. He's always kind of traveling and using ceremonial magic after he learned it through the Golden Dawn. And apparently he received this book, he called it the Book of the Law. He received it over 3 days. And it became the centerpiece of his religion. It's still kind of around today, believe it or not. He had the Stela of Revealing, which was also Stela 666, that came out of what was used to be called the Bulaq Museum, which is now called the Egyptian Museum. But it's still around, believe it or not. There's like associates of some of these guys in the UFO community who knows these Crowleyites who are doing Crowley's Gnostic Mass with the Stela of Revealing in the same setup Crowley had. So his religion definitely permeated Western, if not kind of global occultism. And I think he succeeded in that. He told this guy Clifford Bax, really at the turn of the century, he said, "Today, Christianity is paramount, and one day Crowleyanity will take." I can't remember the exact verbatim statement, but basically his goal was to supplant Christianity with his religion, and to a certain extent, a lot of his philosophies and ideas have permeated and overcome kind of Christian ethos of the turn of the century, 19th century. Excuse me.
When we talk about occult and occultic traditions and practices, what actually are we talking about?
It's a good word. I mean, it's a good question. Like, what is this term? What is esoteric, occult, secret? I mean, occult means you're just putting something behind something secretive or hidden. And I think that's kind of the darker element of some of these Luciferian, satanic things. That Crowley was definitely a Satanist. I mean, he wouldn't come out and say that. He actually inverted everything, where his Lord was the devil. So he wouldn't use these terms of Christian. He said the Christian church was the Black Brotherhood. So a Christian would read that and they'd think, oh, the Black Brotherhood, that must be a bunch of like Druid, Satan-worshipping cloak wearers. No, that for him was the Christian church and all these other priests. So he would insert all that stuff. But I think occultism is really this kind of secret doctrines and secret ideas that have permeated Western traditions, even going back to the Middle East, coming up through the Templars and Baphomet, all the way to the present. There are these secret things that are not for the public and are kept from the public's knowledge through cult systems and initiation and secret signs and hand signs and all this stuff. So I think that's what really Crowley was involved in, was the perpetuation of these secret doctrines and secret ideas that are not bandied about in the public. I mean, there are hints of them. You see pictures and symbols, but some of these doctrines that Crowley was definitely keeping secret were not public, like his recommendation of child sacrifice, human sacrifice. These are not publicly known and not admitted to by other Crowleyites as well, which you can't blame them. They're supposed to be secret and sacred. Crowley would call them sacred. That's how inverted his worldview was. But to short answer, the occult is really just secret knowledge or secret ideas. I think that's a fair description.
What shaped his worldview, though? I mean, mountain climbing or rock climbing. I mean, that sounds quite healthy, for example.
Yeah, no, I think it is. He got into rock climbing because of this. He literally almost died at one of his boarding schools. But I think shaping his worldview was this: something happened to him where he became very antagonistic towards the Christian church. And I think his wealth, and the only child, and his father died when he was 14, so he didn't have that much parental kind of overview of his life. I think that all just shaped his kind of worldview into this very entitled, wealthy, classist, racist person who was also interested in the occult and interested himself, total egotism. And I think that's all reflected in his religion and his writings as well. He was also probably a asset of British intelligence, even before it's kind of been systematized into the bureaucracies, what is known as MI5, MI6. It was called the Secret Intelligence Service back then. He's probably an asset from the time he left Cambridge. He was in weird places at weird times his whole life.
But why did he have such a hatred towards Christianity?
It's a good question. I think that some people really revolt against their upbringing, and he thought maybe he was being kept back by the rigid views of his mom, who he didn't care for. He liked his dad, who died of tongue cancer when he was 14, like I said. But I think he was just became a rebel, and he saw the Christianity. I think he was an authentic anti-Christian. Some people thought it was an act or something, but he kept this kind of anti-Christian animus all the way till his death in 1947, and pro-magic worldview all the way till his death at 72. And what did the evidence for it is people who visited him, and he's screaming at carolers and telling Christians go away, and also being involved still in perpetuating magical ideas. His last book was called Magic Without Tears, which is a series of missives he's writing in his old age when he's an addict. He's a heroin addict, but he's still perpetuating his kind of worldview and his magic. But yeah, I think that he was really just, at a certain point, he rebelled against the Christian ethos and never really went back.
Thelema, what is that?
Thelema is a Greek word meaning will, but that was the term that Crowley used to define his religion, so he called it the Thelema. And then people who follow Crowley are often known as Thelemites amongst their own terms, so it's their own terminology. And these all have kind of Kabbalic meanings, gematria words. Thelema works out to 93 in Crowley, so this 93 number is very important. And also the spelling of the word magic. It used to be the magic term was used in Old English, that's spelled with magic of the K, but it's differentiated from kind of stage magic. And the K is also very important to Crowley too, because it corresponds with his most famous number, which is 11. So K is the 11th letter in the alphabet. And all these correspondences are supposed to line up to kind of convey magical powers. So the use of the K in magic is very important. And the letter K, really. And the number 11, which is included in the Book of the Law, like I told you. So there's a quote in there that says, "Those of us who are of the number 11." And it actually goes back into some of the people who put together the Golden Dawn, who wrote books like Numbers and Their Mystic Virtues and Values. And 11 was always seen as kind of a number of death and destruction.
Do as thou wilt, is that correct?
Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. An 11-word, 11-syllable phrase, yes. So,
what does that even mean?
I think it's the primacy of the man as God. So you can do what you will. So you see these kind of philosophies, these overlying concepts, Thelema, will, but do what thou wilt is really kind of like, there are no rules. You set your own rules. And I think he kind of systematized, he put all this together in one of his small kind of Libras, which is Liber 77, or the rights of man, which is you can do whatever you want. And there's no God but man. So basically, man is in the place of God in Crowley's system. And so do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That's kind of like it ties into the book of the law. And that was his, these are these dictums, these axioms that Crowley had. Another one is love under law, love under will, right? So you see the law and the will, which ties to Thelema. And love in Crowley is agape. That's also a Greek word, which also numerologically in the gematria adds up to 93. So you see 93 is kind of a central number, including 11, to Crowley. And a lot of times Crowley, instead of writing love under law, love under will, in his correspondences, his writings, he would just write 93, 93, 93 to kind of shorthand those ideas, those concepts.
You were talking about Thelema being a religion. So what is meant by that? Because he sounded like he was an atheist.
Oh, I don't think he was an atheist at all. He believed in the devil. He actually believed in God. He actually admits it later in life. I have no doubt that the Bible exists and it's valid, but I just choose not to accept it. So it's kind of an interesting statement. So instead of being agnostic or atheistic, he's like, oh yeah, but this is who I believe in. This being called Awas, which he later says in Magic and Theory and Practice is basically Lucifer.
Right. Okay. So therefore, that is the basis then of the religion.
I think so. It's kind of like a culturally more astute version of Satanism, where from that time and from the style of what Crowley had, from all of his knowledge that he accrued from, the Golden Dawn, from Masonry, and this kind of complex kind of shield. He could shield a lot of his meanings through coded language is the way to put it. But basically, if you look through Crowley's thing, he did have different books. He did have different practices that people had to do. He started his own kind of mail order magical fraternity, which was called the Astrum Argentum. So it's just another part of his religion where you would only have one person ahead of you who would guide you through your magical stuff. And he was very much of kind of like a rigid schoolmaster, actually, for his followers. Like, you had to do this. You had to do your sun salutations, Liber Resh, every day, 3 times a day. You had to do all the stuff, purification and all these other rituals. And then some stuff got really dark, like branding and goat sacrifices and trials and ordeals. And he had his own magical fraternity called the Temple of Thelema, which is in Sicily. And he started that in the 1920s. He was actually kicked out of Italy by Mussolini himself.
Gee. Because I was about to ask, was he himself a bad person? I mean, he was never arrested for anything, or was he?
That's a good question. He was kicked out of France and Italy. So I would say if that means arrest, that's a good question. Whether he was arrested on kind of smaller type charges, I don't recall offhand. But in his interpersonal kind of, I think, relations, he was horrible. He was a horrible parent. He had 5 kids. He never spent any time with them. He would discard his wives or his what he called his scarlet woman. And all the scarlet women were the beneficiaries of a brand on their chest, like a cow, of what he called the mark of the beast, which was a Syrian. Yeah, you can see this you can pull it up, Crowley's Mark of the Beast. They all had this brand on their chest of the mark of the beast. And it's a conjunction of the moon and the sun and stars. And so that was like 11 or 12 women he did that to, literally.
Oh, my word.
For the office of Crowley. And he was bisexual or trisexual, whatever. He raped, according, it gets dark. Because like his magical record of the beast talks about infant rape and stuff like that. It's bad. So yeah, he's a terrible, terrible, terrible human being. He actually encouraged one of his followers to take out a life insurance policy, make Crowley the beneficiary, and then kill himself so that Crowley could get it.
Gee, okay, so he wasn't a good guy.
Yeah, he said it right to his face. There's a lot of stuff that I put in my first book. I was trying to get a handle on who Crowley really was. So I did a lot of research into other people's books who had seen and talked with Crowley, whether it's Somerset Maugham, Hemingway, Clifford Bax. There's a guy named Lance Siefking who was kind of a, he was like a tech guy of his own generation. He spent time with Crowley in the south of France. And he's like, this guy is looking crazy. He's got a shaved head. His tongue is black. And he told me everybody who crossed paths with him either ended up dead or in a lunatic asylum. He's proud about it. Like, he's like hanging out. And Crowley had he would have this elixir of life that he covered his body. I mean, you got to question how sane he was. He would cover his body with almost like suntan lotion, but he was a special kind of elixir that he came up with. And
but it's strange because Hemingway and some of those other names that he associated with, if you think about them, you think about great work.
Yeah, Somerset Maugham is still, Razor's Edge and all that stuff. He wrote a book about Crowley too called The Magician.
But yet, if you say the word Aleister Crowley, nobody really knows other than the fact that he was a bad guy. Like, he didn't write anything that was spectacular or have any positive historical significance.
Well, that's an open question, but maybe not overt. But his the concepts of sex magic and things like that.
No, I said really positive, by the way.
Pardon
I said positive. I said he didn't have a positive impact.
No, I don't think anything he did had a positive.
Yeah,
I can't think of anything. But I think he had a reverberating cultural impact. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yes. Okay, all right. So explain this magic concept to me.
Well, I think it just goes back into the old, prehistory, legends and stuff like that, all the way to the present. And there's other iterations. It's different time. And Crowley had his own version of it. It involved ceremonial magic and practices and studies and training and cakes of light, which were like things you eat and ceremonies. And he wrote all these things. So I think that was his kind of view of his idea of the practice of magic. And you can go read what his ideas of magic were in his book, Magic in Theory and Practice, right? And the whole concept is to, according to Crowley, distill down into another simple phrase or axiom, which is magic is the facilitation to change external reality according to your will, right? So it goes will, Thelema, you're back at that thing again, but I don't remember the exact axiom, but it's basically creating change with whatever you want. So you use magic to create this change, whether you want something, money, women, power, whatever. So he would
Is that what he wanted?
Absolutely, I think so. I think he really wanted to be a first-rate, well-regarded literary figure, and he always just stayed at the second tier. But I think he coveted that kind of fame that some of these other people achieved in their lifetimes, like Hemingway. I think his output is off the charts. Like, he was writing detective fictions and different books, Moonchild and these other fictional books, plays and things like that. He just never got that kind of renown that maybe somebody else who coveted. He was infamous, like he was a known, they called him the man we'd like to hang, or the world's greatest sinner, or things like that. Like, he was known as that kind of person, but not as, the great literary figure that he wanted to be.
You said he had 5 kids. Just very quickly, his offspring, what would they be? Grandkids, great-grandkids today. Do they comment on him? What do they think about him?
I think they all just didn't even want to have an association. One died. They blamed it on bad feeding or something like that. So then the mother, who was Kelly, went insane too. She ended up in a kind of a mental institution. But the other 4 kids, one, he said, she'll make a nice whore. So I don't know what happened to that. There were 2 kids from the Abbey of Thelema. One actually made it to Berkeley, believe it or not, on the West Coast. in California, and she passed away, I think, in 2010. So she lived a long life. Probably never wanted to talk about Crowley, who thought that kids should be exposed to what parents are up to outside of the bedroom and inside of the bedroom. So those were his crazy ideas. Another one he had, there was a woman who said, I want you to be the father of my child. And he said, okay, later in life, like in his 60s, and his name was Ataturk Crowley, after kind of the Turkish leader. And there's records of him. He became kind of a strange figure like Crowley, sleeping on benches and dressing up in weird things, but never really amounted to anything. His only kind of claim to fame was being the offspring of the great beast. And then there's the argument whether Barbara Bush is really Crowley's offspring. So that's like a whole nother full show. But I think it's an open, like, people ask me like my educated opinion. It's like open. She looks just like Crowley. She acts like Crowley. And then the sons, and they're from an occult family, so it would make perfect sense that she would be married into the Bush family.
He is still widely considered as a very big influence on 20th century sort of entertainment culture. And the first thing that comes to my mind if I think of Aleister Crowley is Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. The Zeppelin, I mean, Jimmy Page was really is a Thelemite, and he went to Egypt in 2004 to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the receipt of the Book of the Law. So that's how serious he is, and bought a lot of Crowley stuff. But his impact, and also Timothy Leary, who is a well-known kind of like countercultural figure, said, I'm carrying on Crowley's tradition. Like, he literally has said that. And actually, in my book, Children of the Beast, you can see where he says the synchronicities between Crowley's life and my life are extraordinary. Like, he had been in the same kind of oasis that Crowley was in Algeria. So,
I mean, if you think of... Sorry, go on.
Well, I'm just saying Leary's just one of many. Like Kenneth Anger, who's associated with the Manson family, was literally, he was like friends with Page. So you see these overlapping individuals who are also Crowleyites, and a lot of this, like he wrote Lucifer Rising, right? And in Lucifer Rising is a guy who literally sat on Crowley's knee, whose dad was a friend of Crowley, who wrote Performance, the movie Performance. So these reverberations of Crowleyites and Crowley friends, goes all the way. I mean, so Leary's goddaughter is Winona Ryder, so you see these kind of things going all the way through.
Yeah, you said the Manson family. I said Marilyn because I was thinking of the musician Marilyn Manson, but I think he also knew Aleister Crowley or was influenced by him. But I think you were actually referring to Charles Manson.
Both. Yeah, both. I'm talking about Marilyn Manson also has a song that mentions the Abbey of Thelema, which I talked to you about. But yeah, he was Marilyn Manson's friends with LaVey, who knew of Crowleyites and people like that. So it's just that they would call it the occultists would call it the Crowley current, like this current, this underlying dispersal of Crowley's ideas all the way up until the present, and cultural figures a lot of us are familiar with, yeah.
Yeah, you said LaVey. Anton LaVey founded the Church of Satan, if I'm correct. And he was also influenced by Aleister Crowley, wasn't he?
No question, yeah. There were a lot of like Satanists in the Bay Area at that time. He was one of them. Also, Michael Aquino knew about Crowley. And then this guy who, his name was McMurtry, he was the one who actually wrote the story about Crowley screaming at the Christian carolers, Christmas carolers. But he ended up in Berkeley, too, kind of carrying on Crowley's tradition. And I have a whole chapter about him in my book. But they all knew each other. Interesting stories, too, because McMurtry, it's interesting, I wrote Children of the Beast in 2014. And there's an interesting kind of exchange between McMurtry, who knew Crowley, and Robert Anton Wilson and this guy Jacques Vallée, who is a ufologist. They're talking about UFOs and things like that in Berkeley. And then Vallée shows up on Joe Rogan like last month or something like that. So for me, it's like, okay, these guys are all in the same kind of and then you talk about Hubbard, who knew of Crowley. Crowley's writing about Hubbard, Scientology, and then all this kind of, Stargate stuff. And Puthoff, who's on Joe Rogan again recently, is also a Scientologist. So it's Hubbard. Hubbard's son basically said, my dad thought he was the one who came after in the Book of the Law. He was trying to be like a Crowley type figure. So people who say that Crowley didn't have an influence or a reverberating influence don't understand the kind of occulted kind of secret history of the 20th century.
But why or how did he have such a significant impact in the entertainment industry?
I think it's because of his original promises of egotism, selfish actualization, that he lived the lifestyle he lived is what these people want. Fame, celebrity, sex, and drugs. So I think that was his kind of like the life to, and also his kind of views towards music of the 60s. It's all Crowley kind of, all these guys know it. Rolling Stones, Zeppelin, The Doors, all these guys had books on Crowley and magical books and things like that. So I think that's like his promise. That's part of his promises is kind of, what would they call it? They would be the duality between Apollonian and Dionysian kind of Greek worldviews. Like this is Dionysian stuff, like, sex and drugs and things like that.
Tell me a bit more about the numerology aspect. You said 93 and 11.
Yeah. It's really the key thing. So abracadabra is another word that's an 11 letter. It should be the whole of the law. It's all 11s. It's all systematized down these numbers. We talked about Liber 77 too, the rights of man. But 11 really is the core kind of thing. The reason it's the core is because it symbolizes so many different things. Actually, Crowley called it not just a number, but like a symbol, because it's the opposite of forces, So this whole thing of the magician is try to bring opposition together inside the magician, right? So you're trying to bring in these things, and from a kind of a expansive view, you have the pentagram and the hexagram, the 5 and the 6. They both symbolize something. It's the macrocosm and microcosm, right? And they come together in the magician into an 11, right? So you're supposed to kind of bring these powers together. So you see this 11. Also, the other influence of Crowley's ideas is, of course, Harry Potter. But that's,
Really?
This is the most important, probably one of the most well sold set of books in the world and movies in the world. Is the first book is incredible, man. Like she knew, I don't even think she wrote it, but J.K. Rowling, right? Do you know that she invented her middle initial?
No.
Yes. Do you see the K? Do you see it now? You see it now, like you talked about the K, magic with a K. That's why she invented her middle initial. Go look it up. It's not a real name.
Do you think she's influenced by Crowley?
100%. She knows all this stuff. Harry Potter. How many letters are in Harry? How many letters are in Potter?
Harry. Oh, no ways.
How long is Harry's first wand when he goes wand shopping?
I don't know. I've never read the books.
11. So it's all there. Potter is basically a kind of a reference to alchemy, right? You make clay into gold. That's another kind of inclusion into magic, this kind of old alchemical knowledge and stuff like that from the 16th century, 17th century. Anyway, this numerology pervades so much stuff people aren't even, like, you're not aware of that. But like for somebody like me, I mean, it goes to Stranger Things too.
Like what?
The girls, have you watched Stranger Things?
Oh, you mean the series? No,
Yes.
I haven't watched it.
Okay. Well, the head girl's name is L for 11. She's number 11. So she's like a symbolic representation of magic. Like that's what they call her, L, but it's short for 11. It just goes on through there. I mean, all that stuff. Anyway,
that's mind bending.
it's the truth.
and 93.
So it's we talked about 93. So in outside of Crowley, you have this kind of idea of the Kabbalah, right? This 10 Sephiroth with 4 different spheres. Crowley was into all kinds of old magic. It was not just alleged Jewish magic of the Kabbalah, but he was also into John Dee and Kelly and their whole kind of aether, kind of 49 different aethers, I think, in their communication with angelic Enochian magic and Enochian languages and stuff. Anyway, the part of the Kabbalah that is a breakdown of Kabbalah is gematria, where words have meaning, and power. And one of the ways you determine that is to try to figure out the numerical. So each numerical value. So each letter has a numerical value, and then you add those up. And so both Thelema and agape add up to 93. So 93 became a key component of Crowley's religion. And then so you have 1193. So the main numbers of Crowley really are 1193 and 77. 77 is half of the kind of like man and woman coming together, Lady Babylon and the beast. And then also I talked about Liber 77 or the rights of man, and 77 names of Satan are in the book of, you can read it all in my book, Prophet of Evil. But yeah, so those are really, so those are all numbers. Like he's always, there's actually a page, I think I included it in Prophet of Evil, where he's literally has a whole page of all of these scribblings and all of these names and numbers with their numerical value. And one of the more important numbers that it doesn't really make it out to the public, but 418 was a Crowley number, and it symbolizes the complete magical overthrow of the current world order. So you'll see some strange movies like with Johnny Depp, who's an occultist. Their release date is April 18th for reasons that I understand.
Oh, that's 418.
Yeah. So that's like the occulted name. See, that goes back into the kind of definition of what occult has happened, where you have the secret knowledge, you operate on the secret knowledge, but the external mundanes or uninitiated or whatever the term they have for contempt of people who aren't muggles is the word they use in Harry Potter.
Harry Potter.
This is actually a common kind of conceptual framework for magician. Is somebody else is a mundane, a muggle, an uninitiated, or they're not special, but you're making operational decisions about your life that the public has no clue about what's going on.
But what is the point of playing in the
power, money, and sex?
But I mean, is it a form of communication to one another in a secret way?
For sure, 100%. When I was researching, I just remember I was in a bar of all places in Vegas. It's probably about 2005. Yeah, I think I was on a bachelor party, and a guy walked in and he had this shirt, and I was just starting to go through this whole process of understanding Crowley. He had a shirt on that said 9393, and I was just going to see that, and I was like, I think I know what that number means. I've never, like I said earlier, I've never been initiated. I'm not part of like a cult, but what clicked in my brain when I saw that is like he's signaling to his fellow cohorts. Because I know now, the other people would have known that he was like a follower of Crowley right off the bat because of that number. But the public probably had no clue, But I was like, ding, I know exactly what you're doing. You're signaling to other people through the use of that number. For sure. So I think there is a signaling function.
Yes, because I was wondering about why you would throw around numbers, and it's communication.
I liken it to, analogize it to numbers that are in the Bible. So Christians will say John 3:16. They'll say Ephesians 5:12. Like I know these things, have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them, right? So these, like if you have been in the Christian church for a long period of time. So I think it's just like that. So 93 is the same thing. So the cultist sees 93, they're like, do what thou wilt should be the whole of law. Love under law, love under will. 77, rights of man, there's no God but man. 11, those of us who are 11s, it's the number of magic. We believe in the practice. That's our religion. That's the funny thing. Like people ask me, is like Crowley religious? Yes, he's very religious. He just doesn't have a Christian religion. He's just he was a complete giving himself over to the practice of magic and Satanism.
There's a connection between Aleister Crowley and 9/11.
I think so.
What is that connection? Well,
the numbers of the planes and the date and everything like that, 11's, all that stuff. So the primacy of 11, like even the day itself, September 11th, 2001. So it's an 11 into a big 11 building, but it's 110 stories tall. And the first plane that hits it is plane 11. And so I think it was all very structured and, planned out beforehand. And I don't think it's any it shouldn't be a surprise, or actually, I don't think it's by a random event that George Bush's Senior's famous New World Order speech was September 11th, 1990, right? So the big event was planned at least 11 years ahead. And it was a world-changing event. So I think it was very important. I think it's up to speculation whether George Bush Jr. is the grandson of Crowley. It wouldn't surprise me. But I mean, his mom looks just like a big head. Crowley had kind of a blockhead. He was kind of like, he always tried to disguise it. He would wear like shawls and scarves and stuff like that. But Barbara Bush has that same look. And we can tie her mom, her name was Pierce, I can't remember her first name right now, to kind of to Paris at that time in the 20s. So,
but what would the connection with Crowley have been? Just the numerology, or would it have been more?
Well, you have to. I mean, it's I kind of go through it in my book. It's not just the event, but the cultural change that happened. You have to think about Crowley too. People think of him as kind of a dabbler, but he was very much knowledgeable about the occult. But he also had political views. He had a political application of his ideas. That's what he wanted. And in Crowley's worldview, the real optimal social structure is feudalism. So this talk about neo-feudalism and destroying the middle class, Crowley would have been right on board with that. And he's kind of infamously said, like, people are cattle and they should be treated as such and dispensed with such. You should use them for their leather and mutton and then discard them. Like, he had a very cruel kind of outlook. And if you look after 9/11 and see what happened, it was kind of like the furtherance of that here in the United States. Patriot Act, open board, selling out a lot of the manufacturing in the United States, so people didn't have that access to good jobs, and shipping it off to China. So all these kind of, I think, Crowleyan ideas were there in the culture, the anti-Christian culture, which I think is still perpetuating, still through Obama, who hates Jesus, hates Christ. Is gay and knows a lot of. I mean, he's a relative of the Bushes. Actually, he's a distant cousin. So who knows? He knows a lot about Skull and Bones too. They don't really ever talk about that. But anyway, so I think that the cultural kind of change too, I think, is actually a component of what happened after 9/11 as well. Wars and culling and all that stuff.
What was Crowley's Jewish connection?
I don't know. Crowley traveled very well, but he died before the creation of the state of Israel. But I don't think that he was very racist. He didn't like Italians, black people, Irish. He uses the N-word against Italians, like that's in his writings, and he had contempt for Jews too. Like he had a follower, Victor Newberg, who they would call them the worst stuff. Another follower, like once the bickering with Crowley, once the fallout of his personal relationships would happen, they would start belittling each other. And they call Crowley gay, who liked to have people. He was into some very extreme sexual practices. Crowley was, is a way of putting it. But then he didn't insult his followers who were Jewish. He called them like East End Jews, like grubby Jews and stuff like that. But there was another one, his name who escapes me right now, where they were bickering like that. So not a big fan of the Jews, I would say. Crowley was. And his friends he didn't keep his Jewish friends very long. And
who was he a big fan of?
Himself. One of the interesting things about Crowley that he writes about is that he always maintained his loyalty to the Queen and King, right? So it was Queen Victoria at that time. So he said, "I'm John Sykes' dog," which I think is from Oliver Swift from what's the guy's name? What's the author's name? Robert. Anyway. He is this dog who gets beaten up and keeps coming back. So that's what he likened himself to. So he was always a loyal, and that's one of the interesting things about Crowley, is getting kicked out of so many countries, but but he's always able to limp back into the UK, even after leaving the States, France, Germany, Italy.
You've spoken about Crowley's connection to the New World Order.
Well, the concept of a New World Order is refashioning kind of the world in the kind of vision of what these people want. And it's not a Christian worldview at all. No. It's kind of, I think it's a Crowleyan, satanic, Luciferian view where the slave shall serve, just like Crowley said. And so these overlaps, you can see why they believe in, like, Crowley's doctrines are acceptable to elitist people. I think that's, he called himself a priest to the princes. He also said, don't mess with the muck of the mire, find a diamond and polish it, which he means find smart people and make them smarter according to Crowley's image. So he was a total classicist, or both of them, really both. He knew a lot about the classics, but he was very much part of the class structure of 19th century England. Excuse me. But I think that that's kind of the overlap between the New World Order, its Luciferian kind of groundwork, and Crowley, because they're really almost carbon copies. Slave shall serve, neo-feudalism, get rid of the poor, kill them off, big deal, coaling and stuff like that.
He was a transhumanist.
In a way, Crowley was. I think that he called Lucifer the positive androgyne, or the androgyne, which is a mix of these gender kind of roles. So androgynous, the same word as androgynous. Yeah. So, and I think Crowley, at the really higher ends of Luciferian, if you are a real dyed-in-the-wool Satanist, maybe believer, you become bisexual. I think that, and that's what Crowley really was, is really kind of this bisexual, trisexual person. And you see, so he could be in a certain way, through his kind of doctrines, really one of the founders of this whole transgender movement that's come to today. So
it's very anti-human.
Yeah, I'd say that's it. Well, it makes perfect sense, right? Like just destroying God's creation, or having contempt for it. But some of his followers really, like, there's a guy, Genesis Peorage, who's really one of the real, like, literally went through the transgender surgeries and all that stuff. But he was an admirer of Crowley. I have a whole section of him in my book, Children of the Beast, because he also is kind of that, I mentioned current earlier, but from Crowley to Genesis Peorage to this crazy transhumanism, transsexual stuff that's happening now with the Zizian cult and murders, and there's a smiley face killers, that thing that took place, and some of these guys, transgender guys, are killing people, man. They're violent.
Yeah, also, when we talk about the New World Order, it's another way of saying Agenda 2030, even sustainable development. I mean, these are all the same thing, build back better. It's all variations of the same thing, and Crowley had a role in that.
What you find out is a lot of these guys know a lot about Crowley. So Jimmy Savile is another interesting character, literal pedophile, guy who had sex with corpses and stuff like that. One of his best buddies is King Charles III. So back when he was the Prince of Wales. So you don't know the totality of how deep it goes. Sometimes you get little glimpses of how it goes. But I think a lot of these elites, actually, one of the interesting things is that what we know is Boris Johnson, his wife, was in this play that featured a lot of Crowley's poems and stuff, like the darkest stuff, like the some of the most horrid writings that put to print Crowley did. So Boris Johnson probably knows of Crowley, I would say, for sure. He was very much involved in the perpetuation of this mass colon killing that's going on in Ukraine. Like, they are happy to fill the graves of millions of people. That's the way they could look at this. And I think Crowley would have the same look, like, oh, too bad, you're dead. And Crowley's actually said infamously, before Hitler was, I am. And I think he recognized a fellow traveler in Hitler, like somebody who was part of this black magic experience. Crowley, I mean, Hitler, I mean, we could do another show on Hitler, like full black magician of the darkest stripe, and happy to be in that role. And knew a lot about the stuff Crowley, and there's weird overlaps between Crowley and Hitler. And some of his friends, like Crowley, actually, believe it or not, a lot of people don't know this, but Crowley became the head of a German secret society, the OTO, in 1925. So some of these guys who are in these secret societies are in the Nazis, and you cannot write that stuff. But it's not well known, kind of in American kind of Western history. But these overlaps between Crowley and Hitler are there.
So what was appealing?
I think people get a expurgated version of his personality. So they think of him as kind of like a person of freedom. Like he's actually influenced the gay movement too, gay rights movement. One of the early founders of the gay rights movement, Harry A., used to literally play the piano at Crowley rituals in L.A. You can't even write that. But I think that it's the promise of freedom and detachment from old norms and what they view as kind of like staid, conventional, maybe conservative ideologies. So I think that's what they see. So they want to rebel too. So he's really kind of like a totem or a poster child for other rebels of whatever stripe it is. So I think that Crowley was the kind of person who like led that way, as kind of like almost like Lucifer, being a Luciferian, revolting in heaven, right? So because into culture creation, what Crowley was trying to do with changing the culture, much like Leary, who was guiding Leary, who was guiding Huxley, what's their real goal? And a lot of those goals are synonymous or similar to Crowley's, which is overthrowing the current order, creating the birth of the child, creating this the age of Horus, this kind of new magical world that they felt more comfortable in than the old Christian kind of stuff. And we are experiencing the offspring, the kind of ideological offspring of that now in the United States. It's a total mess. Like you literally have like transsexual kids, and nobody knows the Bible anymore. Everybody's self-centered. Witchcraft is the number one religion. So,
and the heart of Christianity, which is in Europe, is dying.
Yeah, it's in its death knell. The barbarians are through the gates, and it'll be a miracle if they can turn it around. I don't know. I don't think they can turn Europe around. Not at this pace. Not what's keeping this war going. They've lost the plot. They've lost the central theme of their lives and of their history and of the past, present, and future. And if you lose that, you can't be saved. You're just gone.
So what you're saying, William, is Aleister Crowley's impact on where we are today is significant. Ironically, very few people know this.
They're not consciously aware of it. No, they're not. They're not taught it. They certainly aren't taught it on the mainstream media. And I think it's not even a cover-up. It's just that they don't care. They're not as, prime for it. Maybe the Christians are very concerned about Crowley's or satanic influence, but there's so many influence. I mean, you can talk about the West Memphis Three, Damien Eccles, all these guys that loves Crowley. So I think that, I mean, if you want the what happens when Crowley influences your culture, you don't have to look very far, and it's not a good outcome. So people should be aware. So,
okay, so what's the moral of the story?
Crowley's bad. Get back to God. Go read your Bible. Go read the New Testament, and it should be part of your politics and culture. This is the core of your politics and culture and meaning. And they've the reason, I mean, that's really where the linchpin is that holds everything together, is this kind of biblical worldview. The New Testament worldview. I'm not talking about Judeo-Christianity, which is a joke. I'm talking about like actual Jesus is the Messiah Christianity. That's really what save us. That's what's going to save us, really.
Yeah, and I mean, what you just said now is intricately tied to what's called the West.
It is the West. The foundation of the West is really Christian. I mean, it came out of like Roman Empire, but for thousands of years, it's been Christian. I mean, there have been fights and obviously Protestant Reformation, and even America was started by Christian rebels. Really, they wanted to come here for freedom. That was it. That changed the world, really. The foundational Christian views that were involved in the creation of the United States just permeated the world. Like, that's the standard. That's the gold standard, is the Bill of Rights. And all these other countries talk about it. They don't live up to it. The U.S. isn't living up to it anymore. But it all comes back from this kind of zeal for freedom that comes, the real freedom that comes from Christianity and the conquest of sin and death. So Crowley really has to be seen in that context of a kind of a theological context, not a political or cultural, which is a good lens or facet of perceiving that. But he's actually, his whole thing was to overthrow Christianity. I think the people are putty when they lose their moral bearings and things like that. So what they can and can't do, I think they're really putty in the hands of political movements or enemies, really. I mean, you can see this, like the Christians would never let the barbarians through the gates of France or Germany. Like, literally, there's like 200 knife attacks in the last 2 weeks in Germany. They would never have done it. The real Christians would go, look, this guy is a pedophile prophet whose followers murder people. Why are you letting him through the gates? But now that Christianity's worn down and it's almost like a new world order philosophy is running everything, which is a lot of do what thou wilt, egotism. Look at the people who are running Europe these days. They're clowns. Egotism, coke usage. I mean, they'd be right in line with Crowley. So they have to get away from kind of that Christian worldview to the Christian worldview that created these great states and cathedrals and peace and, families and pro-life and taking care of the environment. People need to repent. They need to get away from Crowley and repent.
Okay, William, how can I follow your work, get your books, etc.?
I have all 5 of my books are on Amazon, and all of my episodes, over like 1,300, are on any podcast distribution site, Spreaker, Spotify. It's William Ramsey Investigates. It's the number. Well, it's in the top 0.5% of podcasts in the world, so it streams all over the world. And I got a lot of listeners. I started out as a guest and then kind of inverted over COVID. But I've had a lot of success with the podcast, surprisingly, and it's been a great way to kind of distribute my books. But basically, I was in this kind of role for years to just, talking about Crowley. So I don't even need, to reference my book anymore, believe it or not. I don't even look at notes anymore. I know so much about Crowley.
William Ramsey, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.